Hi, this is Madeline Crane, and this is my lesson plan presentation for ITEC 7430 for fall 2019. My lesson plan is called La vie ne fait pas de moi in French, which means don't judge a book by its cover in English. This is done in my 12th grade International Baccalaureate French class. After we read the novel Monstre Ibrahim et les Fleurs du Coran, or Mr. Ibrahim and the Flowers of the Quran by Eric Emanuel Schmidt, which discusses the theme of identities, childhood, and growing up. This project I split up into 7 different portions. The first one is the project introduction and the reflection on the theme of identity. Then the reflection on personal identity, group research into perspectives of those identities in Francophone countries, learning a new text type, which is going to be an interview, writing or practicing that interview, and finally a summative assessment, which is in the form of a writing. For IB, we don't necessarily have standards. Instead, we have course aims. And the two that I thought fit best were describing situations, making comparisons, and stating or supporting their personal opinions, as well as producing a variety of written texts for audiences, contexts, and purposes associated with academic and personal interests. I specifically chose these two and this project because the main goal of IB is to be able to reflect on a theme personally and connect to it on a more global level. In this case, that is a Francophone culture, and they're having a self-reflection in the form of reflecting on their identity. So I thought these two fit best, as well as the net standards as well. For the first part, there was an introduction and reflection in general on the theme of identity. The way this project was introduced, it was a whole group initially, but then we went into partners. So we discussed the theme of identity, what things made up their identity, what is an identity in general. And then next we focused through the lens of the main character from our novel. We talked about what his identity was according to him and what his identity was according to society, because they differed quite a bit. We did this, like I said, in groups, and then we moved into partners to do this and share it aloud. The second part was a reflection on their own personal identity. Students received this sheet, and they defined what parts of themselves made up their identity, what made them them. They did this individually. Then they picked 2 that they thought defined them the best, and they described them from their point of view as well as a societal point of view, which was in a more what do I think I do versus what society thinks I do. Students initially worked on this latter part individually, but then discussed in groups in order to get a better perspective of what society thinks I do. They asked other people of their viewpoints as well. Next, we did group research into the respective identities in Francophone cultures. So these groups were made based on similar identifiable characteristics, like if they all chose religious identifiers like Buddhist or Muslim or Christian, they were all grouped together in order to help make research easier. This was done digitally via Google Classroom, and students shared their research with their groups as well. So they had the option of either doing research, splitting up and doing research, or researching all at the same time and reviewing one document or one resource. They had the option of using any resource from the internet as long as it was valid, which they should know beforehand, since it is something that is emphasized in other classes as well. Students did have the option of working individually if that is what they chose to do, but they understood that working in groups was going to be better for themselves. After that, we learned our new text type, which is an interview. Text types are important in IB classes because students need to be able to read and write certain text types. We discussed things in a group like purpose. We also broke off individually on what they thought the essential parts or conventions that we would be looking for in the rubric were for an interview. We discussed what a template would look like. The most important part of this was being able to recognize when a text type would be required, because for IB, for their writing assessments, the text types are implicit instead of explicitly stated, meaning it might give a description and require a task if an interview, but you are going to have to know that's in an interview based on the different text types that are given. Next, in smaller groups, they they completed a practice interview, which was also done digitally on Google Classroom. They worked on it at the same time, and these were more or less self-chosen groups. Some groups had had anywhere from 15 people researching the same identifiable characteristic, so they split off into smaller ones in order to do this practice. They used this practice prompt as a jumping off point, as well as this template, and they planned out specific requirements. And it was turned in via Google Classroom as well. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to do this practice interview, but if they did, they would have then left feedback on Google Classroom in the form of comments on other groups to help them improve. Finally, we did a writing assessment. This was their final writing assessment, or their performance final for the semester. Unlike any other IB writing test, they had 3 different prompts with 3 different text types. But each text type was not explicitly stated in the prompt, so they had to use their skills in order to figure out which text type fit best with each prompt. The test also included writing a brochure or a blog, which was learned the previous year in their junior IB class. So they did have the option to write an interview, but they also were able to write a brochure or a blog. When I do this again next year, I'll definitely plan for more time. Right now, the lesson was only 5 days, and it was a bit rushed. I had absent students because it's at the end of the semester, and a lot of them were taken out of the classroom for testing. I would also allow for more time for research or the self-reflection portion of the identity. I think that could have allowed a little bit more time, and it seemed a little bit rushed. I would also make sure to model how students should research, even though they have previously learned this, and it is an ongoing learning process about learning what sources are valid and credible to use. I think they could have used another lesson, maybe even from specialists in the media center, on how to determine if a source is a good fit or not, as well as how to research in French. And lastly, I would change the way I introduce the project. The emphasis was more on the final product of writing an interview instead of on the purpose of the project and the intention of the project, which is making that personal and global connection.